So this is the second installment in our video series. In the first one, you received a crash course on structural anthropology, foundational knowledge upon which MotivBase Trends is built. Here, I'm going to continue from the end of that narrative there and remind you of why MotivBase Trends, before we actually go into a demo, I'm going to remind you of why we study the broader context of conversations around a topic. Fundamentally, more than 70% of the meanings that we as human beings associate with topics, ideas, trends, issues are all implicit. More than 70%. Less than 30% are expressed. That basically means that if you ask a human being, you're only getting less than 30% of the equation. Majority of the way we give meaning to the world around us is implied, which means in order to decode the true meanings associated with a topic or an idea, we actually have to look at the implicit side of the equation. In order to look at the implicit side of the equation, we talked about this in our last video, we have to look at the broader context of conversations around gut health, not just the direct mentions of the topic. We have to look at the broader context of discourse, the broader context of language use around gut health, and then quantify that to build sort of our own solar system of meaning, so to speak. And by the way, I'm going to butcher physics in this demo that follows in a second. But that's fundamentally what we're doing here. In order to truly understand the meanings around a topic, we are decoding the broader context of discourse that is happening around the topic. So what I've done here is run a search on gut health in our tool. Now, when you run a search on gut health, instantly what happens is the technology goes and identifies the contextual boundary, basically identifies the boundary of our solar system. Just like in the example you saw in the last video with those 3 data points, now the technology is looking at hundreds of thousands of data points in the broader context of gut health, if not millions. And from these data points, it extrapolates topics in the broader context. Then it quantifies those topics and surfaces the most important relevant to us. So in essence, what happening here is that in the gut health universe, in the solar system of gut health, there are more than 50,000 planets, right? There are more than 50,000 planets in this universe, in this solar system. And what we're seeing are the most dominant ones, the closest ones to the sun. The reason we quantify and surface that is because this is where our analysis begins. The ones closest to the sun, in essence, give us a sense of exactly what it is that people think of, what's going on in people's mental models, what's going on in their minds when they think of gut health. That's fundamentally what this allows us to get at. Now, for the purpose of our analysis here, I'm not going to dive into the process of how we extract meaning by exploring this map of meaning, by exploring these topics, these meanings. I'm going to do that in the next video, so watch out for that. Here, I want to focus on giving you a quick walkthrough, because once our machine is able to build this contextual data model of the meanings, the dominant meanings around gut health, it is then able to run a series of very important calculations. The first one being of maturity and population. And this is used by all our 135, 38 plus clients globally in order to make important decisions around strategy, pipeline development for their innovation lifecycle, all the way down to timing of specific launches and initiatives. And that's because not only does it tell us how many people a particular idea or topic is related to or relevant to. In this case, it's telling us that there's a maximum size of about 43 million people in the US that will engage on the topic of gut health. That's basically the extent of it, and that includes the broader context. It also tells us, and perhaps this metric of maturity is even more critical, is how much consensus there is around the meanings around gut health. And bear with me here as I butcher physics. It's basically measuring whether the planets around gut health are slowly beginning to converge towards one another. As they converge towards one another, they start to look more and more like synonyms. And as they look more and more like synonyms, there's greater agreement, which means the maturity moves along the curve and enters into mainstream acceptance and eventually into established ideas. So that's in essence what we're measuring. We're measuring how much consensus there is among this culture of a max of 43 million people. How much consensus is there, and is this consensus growing? I.e., is there a clear pattern of these meanings, of these planets slowly converging towards one another? In this case, Consensus is at about 17.7%, and it's growing to 22.8%, but it's going to stay in the early consensus stage of maturity, i.e. it is pre-mainstream. It's yet to take on a life of its own. At this stage in time, if you action on this, you have to be aware of the fact that the gut health universe may get disrupted once again before it eventually enters into the mainstream. But the flip side of it is you have a lot more control, you have a lot more flexibility in shaping the meanings around gut health, and you can intervene as an organization in ways that you may not be able to once it enters into the mainstream zeitgeist. The technology does so much more, measures instant sociodemographics. This is all US data, by the way, that I'm demoing here. We do work globally, but instantly will tell us class, age, income, gender, ethnicity, education, so on and so forth. And then, I'm giving you a super quick overview here, but it will give us the ethnographic DNA. So this is the AI anthropologist decoding the contextual data model of meaning. So it's basically looking at all the planets in our solar system, and it's decoding the why behind everything that's being talked about, behind the use of language. So it's telling us what are the underlying intrinsic motivations, attitudes, fears, and values that are driving the consumer's interest around gut health. For example, regaining control over my body, caring about having a healthy sense of self-image, wanting to, take control away from the medical establishment, feeling like having quite a cynical view towards the medical industrial complex and the established organization of the medical industry, and so on and so forth. So despite using an artificial intelligent engine, machine learning, and all that in order to decode meaning, we can still build deep empathy for the human condition behind the topic. It's just that instead of doing this by following around 10, 12 people in a traditional ethnography, now we get data from an anonymized group of 455,000 unique Americans between the ages of 18 and 64, and we get to still build empathy. We're just building empathy for such a large size of or pool of data that the chance of us missing the voices on the margins is so much less, and we get a much clearer, better picture of what the culture is today and where it's headed in the future and how quickly and so on. So that's fundamentally what I wanted to walk you through today. A lot more coming up in the next video. Thank you for watching.